I'd like to next talk about the neck because, like the shoulders, it's one of those areas that is very often neglected in the study of nonverbal communications. The neck obviously holds up our heads, but through this area flows all the blood that is so essential from the heart to the brain. All the oxygen that we receive is transported through the neck. All the food that we intake is transported through the neck. And most of the major nerves in our body also are associated with the neck through the spinal cord and even ventrally through the vagus nerves, which are near the front of our necks. Because this area is so rich with nerves, blood supply, and oxygen, this is one of those primary areas of the body which needs to be protected. And because so much of our survival is concerned with the neck, it's one of those areas that most often and most effectively communicates how we feel. We often hear people talk about, well, he had a throbbing vein that I could see on his neck, which was indicating distress. Or we see the father who is worried about the child that's in the hospital and he's massaging the front of his neck. We see the coworker who can't square the numbers at the end of the day and they're massaging the back of their neck. We see the woman who is on the phone and she is very lightly touching the sides of her neck with her fingertips. And you may never have looked at the neck as a source of information, and yet this is one of the most vital areas for nonverbal communication. The neck serves as one of those locations that is just so rich with nerves that it helps to pacify us. And so when we're stressed, we go get a shoulder massage and a neck massage. When we're stressed, we may massage ourselves. We may touch our neck, stroke our neck, ventilate our neck as an indication of stress relief. And this is an extremely useful tool to us for those of us who study nonverbal communications. Now, most people miss these behaviors, or they say, well, touching the neck really doesn't mean anything. Well, I want you to, from this day forward, tell yourself, everything associated with the neck has meaning. Now, obviously, sometimes you scratch your neck because it itches. That's different. But when we see individuals who touch their neck, massage their neck, and so forth, what they're doing is pacifying themselves. And you often see this in relation to something stressful. So you see a student working a mathematical problem. He's sitting there and he's massaging his neck. This is a very soothing behavior. Or once again, the father who's waiting to hear from the doctor about his son in the hospital, and you see this extreme massaging of the front part of the neck. Well, what's happening is this man, what he's really doing is putting pressure on the vagus nerve, which actually tends to relax the heart and tends to get the heart to slow down. And all around the world, we see individuals using their necks to pacify, to soothe themselves, to calm themselves down. And the beauty of it is that it happens in real time. Now, men around the world, we tend to do it a little bit more robustly. We tend to grab our neck. We tend to pull on the skin in front of our neck and so forth. Women do it slightly different. Women tend to just touch their skin on their necks very lightly. They tend to just move the hand across the neck and so forth. Or they may grab the jewelry, the necklace around the neck, and play with it. But one of the things that's significant, and it was one of the things that I first wrote about when I first started studying nonverbal behavior because I hadn't seen it anywhere else in the literature, is that women tend to cover this little notch, this little area right below the Adam's apple. Sometimes it's referred to as the neck dimple, as my friend Dr. David Givens likes to call it. But the true name for this little area, which is right above the sternum but right below the Adam's apple, is called the suprasternal notch. The reason it's called that, it's because it's above the sternum, sternum notch. And what I found, and what others have now also observed, was that when women feel insecure, when they're distressed, when they're troubled, or they feel threatened, they'll cover this little area, this suprasternal notch, this neck dimple, in real time with the tips of their fingers or with their hands. And as they talk about something, they'll cover that. Now, one of the demonstrations that I use in class, I once saw a woman talking on the phone. I was standing next to her, and she was telling her girlfriend about this creep that walked by. And as she said creep, she put her hands to the small area of the neck, and then she says, but then he went away. And then the hand, of course, leaves her neck. And then he says, but then he came back. And then she covers her suprasternal notch again. And it was a real poignant story for me, because in real time I could see the significance of it, and that it was showing up and going away in real time. And of course, when we look at 9/11 and we see a lot of the people watching television, this horrific event, you notice how many women are covering this suprasternal notch as they were witnessing this event on television. Now, how do we use this information? Well, we use it to assess for comfort and discomfort. And when I see someone that I'm interviewing, my company has quite a few employees, and they come in and they are auditioning for a job. One of the things that I look for is, as they talk to me and I ask them questions about their career and so forth, are they covering this area up? And if I see that, then I know for a fact that there's something troubling there, something that bothered them. Maybe they had a lousy boss. Maybe they had a bad experience. Maybe they flunked a test. Any number of things. It doesn't mean that they're lying. It just means that they are emotionally affected by it, and it's always negative. Now, one of the interesting things that I used to use this information for was I, as an FBI agent, worked a lot of rapes on what were then called Indian reservations, and they may still be called that. And on the Native American reservations, it's the FBI that investigates major crimes. And one of the things that I found with women who had been raped, even years before, they always tended to cover this neck area, the suprasternal notch, as they told this story. But one of the things I noticed was with people who were filing bogus claims of rape. And this often happened with young ladies who got pregnant and they didn't want their fathers to get upset. So rather than say they had consensual sex, they said, well, I got raped. One of the things that I failed to notice was as they were talking about this supposed rape, they tended not to cover the suprasternal notch. So in other words, the negative emotions weren't attached to the story they were telling. And of course, to me, it didn't mean that they were lying. To me, it meant that I needed to ask a few more questions to decipher what was really going on here. So as an observer of human behavior, I want you to focus on these little things. When does the person touch their neck? How do they touch their neck? Is it because they're nervous at first meeting you or at the beginning of the meeting? Or does it only show up in response to something that's being said or in response to something that they are having to disclose? And what you'll find is how extremely accurate these neck behaviors truly are. Earlier, I talked about children and babies and how they relate to their mothers. And one of the things that I mentioned is head tilt and how we use head tilt for attraction. And the mother tilts her head for the baby responds in kind, tilts its head. And we have this exquisite harmony that's taking place between these two individuals. Well, this doesn't go away. In fact, when we're very comfortable, we too tilt our heads. Just think about being in a classroom and you're listening to someone that you appreciate or you are enjoying the performance, and you begin to see a lot of head tilt behaviors. This is associated with comfort. Now, what usually happens, you're talking to someone, and at some point in the conversation, your head begins to tilt as you're listening to them. Now something is mentioned that you don't particularly care for, and immediately and in real time, that head straightens up. Or you're talking to someone, your head's tilted, everything's going well, and a stranger comes into the room and maybe gets too close to you. Immediately, your head untilts. This is our brain's way of transmitting that we've gone from comfort to slight discomfort. And the beauty of it is that it occurs in real time. And we can capitalize on these things because many times you may be talking to someone and maybe something political is mentioned. And right away you recognize, oh my goodness, I just got into an area that I really shouldn't have gotten into. And I can recover from that because I just saw their head go from tilt to straight. And now I should pursue something else rather than continue on this path. I often give this example, and I'll suggest it to you to try it sometime. Next time you're in an elevator, try tilting your head with a bunch of strangers in the elevator. And what you'll find, just like the leg cross, is your limbic brain will say to you, don't do that. In fact, I've talked to some people that said they just absolutely couldn't bring themselves to ride face-to-face with strangers in the elevator with their heads tilted. And the reason is very simple. That which we reserved early on for those that loved us, we can't use with those for whom we care little for. Now, one of the things that unfortunately researchers have told us, and it really is quite sad, and that is that mothers in particular, there's not a lot of research with men, but mothers in particular who don't care for their children or who abuse their children will rarely tilt their heads when around them. So those great images that we have from art and from life itself of the mother head tilted towards the baby, showing extreme and high comfort. Unfortunately, we see very little of that between a child and an abusive parent. Now, one of the things that we can do with this behavior is when we are talking to individuals, and let's say they come to us with a problem, we can diffuse a situation. We can make them feel more comfortable by, for instance, turning slightly at an angle to them, not turning away, but just turning slightly at an angle and tilting our heads. And in doing so, what we are doing is creating a softer environment to where they feel that you are receptive to what they're saying and not just being officious. So a simple behavior, a little head tilt as someone talks to you, makes them feel much more appreciated. It makes you appear to be much more open, and it makes for a very much more comfortable environment. Well, at this point, we've talked about the feet, the legs, the hips, the torso, the shoulders, and the neck. And now we need to focus our attention on the areas of the body which tend to do a lot of communicating for us. In fact, some people say that when they see me talk, they say, well, your hands are doing all their talking. And there's many of us that do that. So I want to talk about the hands and the arms because they truly do communicate a lot of information. As with so many parts of the human body, our arms are really very remarkable. They reflect quite often how we feel, what we're thinking, what we intend. They point in the direction that we want people to go. They reach up to the skies when we are excited and happy. When you see people at the football stadium or at any sporting event around the world, You don't see them celebrating a goal or a point or something momentous by pointing down at the earth. You see them elevated above their heads. This is a universal reaction. This is an emotive reaction. This is a positive reaction. It's a defying of gravity with an upward motion of the arms to signify that something terrific has taken place. Now, when you go to a football game or a basketball game, you don't get a memo that says, hey, when they score a goal, I want you to move your arms up and wave them in the air. We all seem to do that around the world. These feelings of excitement, when we are ecstatic, when we're happy, we gravitate towards the sky. We elevate ourselves, we defy gravity. And this is one of those things that we need to be looking for when we're talking to people and they're emphasizing, they're telling us how excited they are about a product, when they're telling us this is really important. We want to look at those arms and say, what are they doing? We want to see, are those arms just laying at the person's side? Or worse, are they behind their back? Or are they out in front? Or up above their heads, defying gravity? These are the kinds of subtle things that we look for. But once again, this is the brain communicating. There's excitement here. And when we're excited, we defy gravity. And we defy gravity both outward and upward. Another interesting thing about the arms is how we use it to communicate whether or not we want people near us or away from us. Now, we often see the mother or the father standing in front of the child, palms open, arms outstretched, basically saying, come to me. And the child comes running and immediately they're engulfed with those very same arms. Nothing needs to be said. Children immediately recognize this. And in fact, if you've had children, you remember how the baby would lay there in the crib and with her arms reach up, wanting to be picked up. They didn't say it, but they spoke it loudly, non-verbally. So we use the arms to communicate how we feel, what we intend. We intend to be picked up. We intend to be hugged. We intend to be caressed. We use the arms in this way, but we can also use the arms to say, stay away from me. And there's a variety of ways to do that. Now, earlier we talked about people who cross their arms in front of themselves. And that can be very comfortable. Or it can also say, you know what, I'm a little disappointed in you. And it creates a small barrier. So you have to put it in context. Or here's one that we sometimes see, but we're not sure what it means. And it's called the regal position. And what it looks like is just put your arms behind your back and just hold your fingers together in some way so that your arms disappear sort of behind your back. You can't see the hands. Now, who do we see doing this? Well, we see Queen Elizabeth doing it. We see most of the royals doing it. And what does it mean? It means don't come near me. We see professors at the university doing this. We see attorneys doing it. And once more, it says, and the message is clear, don't come near me. Well, why is that? Because from a very early age, what we most enjoy is seeing the arms that are pointed towards us, the beckoning arms, the palm up that says, come to me. And when we see the arms disappear, it changes the message. It says, stay away from me. How sensitive are we to this? It's not just us. Look at a dog and put your hands in front of you, palms up, and watch their behavior. And then watch what happens when you put your hands behind your back and you stare at the dog. And what you'll find is that even your four-legged animals don't like this behavior. So here's a behavior that the brain uses to communicate, I want to be left alone right now. I want to think, or I don't want you to touch me. And we demonstrate this by putting our hands behind our back. And I mention this because many times people use this behavior. I've seen a lot of attorneys use this behavior in court not realizing that the jury is perceiving these individuals as being somewhat arrogant or being a little bit standoffish, as being too erudite. And one of the ways that you can humanize yourself is by making yourself accessible. And we make ourselves accessible by the use of our arms, not by removing the arms. So here's a behavior that we see all the time. We often see it with white-collar individuals, with individuals of higher status, and we may not have known exactly what it meant, but now we do. As we talk about the arms, I want you to imagine someone who is sitting in front of you with their arms on top of the table and their palms are up versus someone who's sitting in front of you at the table with their palms down. And what you notice is that the rotating of the arms, palm up or palm down, forces us to reveal different aspects of our arms, the ventral side versus the dorsal side. And this, in fact, has significance. When we emphasize, we tend to do it palms down. We tend to be more forceful with our palms down, with the dorsal side of our arms showing. When we're weak, when we're supplicating, when we're begging to be believed, when we're asking for favors, we tend to do it with the palms up. Now, this is important for us who are in the communication business because these messages are being sent subconsciously. And if you are in a business where you're trying to emphasize a point, one of the best ways to do it is to always make sure that you emphasize palms down. Because when we do things palm up, we're sending a very subtle message that is somewhat weak. It's more of a caring gesture, and that's fine if that's the kind of message we want to send. But when we want to emphasize, palm down, very direct. When we are asking for something, when we come in and say, I'd like to take next week off, you'll notice that people tend to do it with their palms up rather than their palms down, because in fact, we are asking for a favor. So even with these things, we begin to differentiate and we begin to see that subtle behaviors, the way we carry our arms and so forth, have a lot to do with what we're thinking. Because our outstretched arms can cover as much as 6 feet of space, some less, some more, depending on your height, we use our arms to communicate a lot of information that deals with how we feel about ourselves or with a particular situation. Now, earlier I talked about arms akimbo. And arms akimbo, I said, you put your hands on your hips and your elbows are way out. And you can see that you take up quite a bit of space. In fact, it takes up twice as much space as you normally do. Now, that's one way of showing that you're in charge or this is an issue to me. But there's something else that we can do to demonstrate that we are in charge. And we often see this, and it's slightly different. And I want you to picture, as I'm doing now, you put your hands behind your head, you interlace your fingers, and your elbows are way out. So in essence, you're showing everybody your armpits and the insides of your arms, but your fingers are interlaced behind your head. And you ask yourself, well, when have I seen this? Usually you've seen it with people who are very relaxed. But you also see it with people who are in charge. This is a very territorial display. Once again, it takes up a lot of territory. And it is demonstrative of our comfort in this particular situation. Now, here's what I find interesting. A lot of times you'll go to a meeting and there'll be one or two colleagues and they'll be talking to each other in this fashion with their fingers interlaced behind their head. And they'll be fine for a while, and then the boss walks in. And when the boss walks in, they stop doing it. Now, nobody said knock it off. Nobody said stop it. Why did they stop doing it? They stopped doing it because only the boss, only the highest person in that hierarchy is really entitled to take up that much space. And so we automatically undo that. We unhinge those fingers so that if the boss chooses to do that, he can then claim this territory. And in a way, it reminds me of snakes, especially cobras. And you see cobras when all of a sudden they hood and they make themselves look larger. It's a warning, stay away. I'm powerful, this is my territory. And if you look at somebody that has their hands behind their head and their fingers are interlaced, there's a sort of hooding effect that takes place there, and it looks very much territorial like that. So I often refer to it as the head hooding. And this is one of those things that you look for. You walk into a meeting with some new people, and you look around the room and you see who's doing this behavior. And many times you can actually determine what is the hierarchy of this meeting by watching the behaviors of these individuals as they're hooding themselves. So what else do we use the arms for? Well, our arms are actually one of our best protectors. And I often tell the story of the time that I was getting into a car and it was parked at an angle and the door accidentally shut on me. And unfortunately, I was holding up an umbrella and the corner of the door hit my rib and broke a rib. And how much I have learned over the years to appreciate just how well our arms protect us. In fact, one of the things that we look for in forensic work, in the work that I used to do in crime scenes, is what we call defense wounds. And it's sad, and yet it's interesting at the same time how often we see people who are shot, and we see the arm has blocked unsuccessfully the bullet. The bullet actually enters the arm, goes through the arm and into the body. And you say, how could this be? That bullet is traveling 900 feet per second. And what happens is that we are so reflexive. Our limbic system is so attuned to our environment that it can accurately block those things that are potentially threats. So whether we have an animal grabbing at us, we have someone throwing a ball at us, or in the cases that I've seen where we've actually had FBI agents shot and you see the bullets going through their arm, the limbic brain has marshaled the resources of the arms which serve as blocking mechanisms. But unfortunately, we weren't designed to stop something that was traveling at 900 feet per second. So the arms defend us from physical threats. They also save us and protect us from social threats. And obviously, we can't be pushing people away all the time, or we can't be turning away from people. But there are things that we can do to psychologically defend us. And one of the things that we can do is create barriers. And we've talked about students with books. But we can also create barriers with our clothing, where someone will suddenly just put on clothing over their arms as a form of indicating, I am distressed by this. And they, in the process of clothing themselves, they're creating actually an extra barrier, almost like a shield. And I've seen this oftentimes during interviews where when we get to the specific point of the interview that is the most threatening to the individual, the person will say, well, I need a coat. Or they begin to hug themselves and they begin to stroke their own arms as an effort to, one, protect themselves physically, but also to pacify themselves psychologically. Like the torso, the arms often serve as a place where we can show some of the social artifacts that define who we are. And so we see the fine jewelry, we see the fine watch. In the old days, it used to be the Navy sailors with the tattoos. Now we see those things with a lot more people. But in each and every one of these cases, and certainly you see this still in the Middle East, where a lot of the wealth of the individual is worn on the arms in the form of jewelry. That's still the case in the areas of Mesopotamia, Saudi Arabia, and even India. And so the arms serve to communicate not only what we feel about ourselves, but they also serve to communicate something about our social status, what we do for a living, and so forth. We talk about the truck driver arms, where part of the arm is suntanned and the other one is not. And this is something that I, as an observer, am always looking at and say, it's not just what the feet say or what the arms say or the torso. Is every different part of the body, what is it communicating to me? And in this case, what are the arms communicating to me? Is this person a weightlifter? Is this person really in shape? Have you ever noticed that tennis players tend to have one arm that's stronger, more robust than the other arm? The same thing with bowlers. The carpenter who has the stronger wrist on the right hand than on the left hand. Little things like this communicate to me something about the individual. Now, that's only part of the picture, but it's a part of the picture. And if we're to read nonverbal behaviors, we want to look at all the things that are being communicated so that we can use this to put the larger picture together. In this next section, I want to talk about the hands, because human hands are truly creative hands. They're truly expressive hands. They are, in many ways, magnificent in what they're able to describe, create, explain, and communicate, unlike any other species on this planet. We have an inordinate amount of nerves that are attentive to our hands. And in fact, when we look in the area of the brain where the hands and the thumb are connected, we can see that this is a rather large, rather robust area, which is designed to enhance our ability to perceive the world through our hands. Temperature, wetness, dryness, whether something's pointy, whether it's harsh, whether it's round, all these things. And to sense that which is soft, the soft skin, the warm skin, and so forth. The hand can serve as a thermometer. It can also create the exquisite. And the hands can communicate an extraordinary amount of information. So as we talk about the hands, I want you to look at your own hands. And this very second, ask yourself, where are my hands right now? Are they cooperating with each other, or is one hand doing something independent of the other? And you begin to realize that, yes, our hands can actually do two things at once. And some of you may be driving and listening and turning up the volume. That's two things at once. Or they may be harmoniously doing something together, whether it's steering the wheel or turning a page or something. Our hands can work independently, as our astronauts and pilots so often do, or they can work harmoniously, as our physicians often see. Or they can contribute to the thought and the feelings that we have. And we often see this with lovers as they're caressing each other's faces. Their hands are equally working in unison to communicate that which is being felt. Probably no other area of the body is used more by our species than our hands. We use the hands to get dressed in the morning. We use our hands to wash ourselves. We use the hands to telephone, to communicate, to email. We use the hands to transport ourselves. We use our hands to work. We use our hands for rowing, kayaking, flying RC airplanes, for knitting, for all sorts of things. We also use our hands to heal. We use our hands to relieve stress. to make people feel good. There are just so many things that we use our hands for that we have to be very appreciative of what it is that our hands communicate and how they do this in very real time. When we talk about the hands, one of the best places to begin with is what's called haptics. Haptics is the science of touch. That telephone you're using, how that phone feels to you when you touch the keys or the keyboard, or for jet pilots, how that switch feels or how that switch is designed. It's based on haptics, the study of what feels best. When you caress that baby for the first time, when you trace the facial features of a child with your finger, that imprinting that goes on, and you use your fingers to do that. This is part of our use of haptics, that we collect information based on touch, that we communicate information based on touch. And here's an example. People who love each other, when we hold a child, when we hold someone that's dear to us, we tend to touch them with the full palms of our hands. Our skin fully touches this individual, whether it's your mother, your grandmother, or the loving face of a child. When we don't care about things, we tend to distance ourselves from them. And one of the ways we distance ourselves is that we no longer touch with a full palm. We tend to then touch individuals with fingertips. A couple of years ago, I was asked by a national magazine to see if one of the actresses was going to be breaking up soon, because there was some rumor concerning that, and they sent me some photographs. And I said, well, I'm not sure, but I can tell you this. The way she and her husband are touching each other now is different than they used to touch each other. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, in the old days, they used to touch each other with the full hand. Now, if you notice, whenever he's touching her with the tips of his fingers. This is distancing. And what I find is that when people begin to distance themselves, they distance themselves in particular with how they touch each other. Oh, for social reasons, they may still have to touch each other. They got to hold hands or accompany each other to an event. But how they touch each other begins to show with their fingertips. And when that begins, there's distancing involved. And a small child will feel that. A small child will feel the difference between a parent that merely touches the child very quickly, maybe with the fingertips, versus the parent that caresses that child and touches that child with the full hand. And you see this in the workplace, where a supervisor comes by and taps you on the shoulder with his fingertips and says, "Great job." And you sort of cringe when they touch you. And yet another boss comes by, puts his hand on your shoulder, grabs you and touches you with his full palm and says, "That was a terrific job." And we feel good after that, because those are good haptics. That is a good way to demonstrate I really care, versus the person who is merely meeting social obligations and does it through distancing. So here's something very subtle, haptics. We see it every day in one form or another, but maybe we've never paid attention to it. And once again, all behavior is governed by the brain. And if the brain says, I feel good about you, there's going to be more touch. It's going to be more intimate. It's going to be more profound. And when we don't feel good about something or someone, we tend to distance ourselves, and it's often reflected in our touch. One of the things that you'll notice when it comes to haptics is how children touch their parents. And you notice that it's full, it's very complete, there's no distancing involved. It's usually very profound in how they do it. And this is a good indicator of what's going on, including the way they hug us. Their hugs are complete, they're not restricted, they're not limited in any way. So as we look at this model that we've talked about of comfort and discomfort, I want you to be thinking about how is it that we touch other people and how is it that they touch us? Are we seeing comfort or discomfort? And what may jump out at you is that we see two people and they touch each other in one way, and yet when they touch us differently. Now, obviously, there's inappropriate touching, and there's no need to get into that. But where it's appropriate, there may be differences in that, and it truly reflects what we're feeling. Now, when it comes to our hands, we actually have an orientation reflex for the hands. And I think in part this has to do with the fact that for millions of years, the only thing that could hurt us was really the hands. It's the hands that can punch. It's the hands that can hold a sharp object. It's the hand that can hold a stick. And of course now, it's the hand that can hold a gun. And in talking to my colleagues in the Secret Service, and from my own experience in the FBI, you don't have to worry about a face. You don't have to worry about a leg. But you got to worry about the hands, because it's the hand that can kill you. It's the hand that can hurt you. And so these are one of the things that we look for. And because our limbic brain is constantly assessing for danger, one of the things that it looks for is, where are the hands? And so we don't like it when someone goes up to a podium and speaks behind the podium, behind the lectern, and we can't see their hands. In fact, we've done studies where people in the audience have been asked to rate speakers, and those speakers, same message, who did not use their hands, who had their hands hidden, either their hands on the lectern or behind their back, were always rated less than those who used their hands. So we want to see the hands, but it's not just because of danger that we want to see the hands. We want to see the hands because they express information. The hands illustrate information. You can illustrate, as I'm doing right now with my index fingers on both hands. You can illustrate a square. You can illustrate a circle. You can reach out to the moon or the sky, and your audience will follow you as you demonstrate these behaviors. And obviously, magicians take advantage of that. They know you're going to follow movement, and so while you're following movement, they're doing something with their other hand. But we seek to be communicated with by the hands because we are a very visual species. So those of you who are in the business of giving information, you want to be able to utilize your hands to communicate. Now, there's some of you that say, well, now we have email, and then we have voicemail, and we have this and that, and I say, stop right there. There's a reason why we still come together in meetings. There's a reason why I'm hired to come and appear before a group. And it's because we need to visualize information. Otherwise, we would just type the information. And yet, that's not enough. That's not enough. We need this extra information that we get from the use of hands and gestures, but hands in particular. And hands can communicate a lot. When we put our fingers together, the thumb and the first two fingers, we can indicate precision when we're talking about something that's very precise. I know that you can envision me touching my little fingertips as I'm talking about that. We can talk about something expansive by using jazz hands where we extend our fingers fully and they stretch, and we are transported to something differently when we use expressive hands. Or we do something that we may see, but we are not sure what it means, and we see someone steepling. And steepling is when we bring our fingertips together, but don't allow our palms to touch, so that our fingers look like a church steeple. Steepling is in fact the most powerful behavior that we have to show confidence. Now, we could be wrong, but it shows confidence. It shows that we're very confident about what we're talking about. And here's a behavior where you don't have to yell, you don't have to scream, you don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to make eye contact. You merely have to bring your fingertips together, thumbs together, fingers spread apart, hands spread out, fingers still touching, and it transmits to whoever's hearing the message. They're very confident about what they're saying. And one of the interesting things about steepling is that I find that there's some literature out there from the 60s and 70s which told people not to do this. Well, I'm here to tell you, stop. Use it. It's very powerful, especially if you're a speaker. Number two is if you're a woman, you're not using this behavior enough because we rarely see women using this behavior. And yet, when you're sitting there with a bunch of guys and you're trying to make a point, one of the easiest ways to do it is by steepling. And unfortunately, in America, women tend to steeple low. They tend to do it with their fingers together, or they tend to do it under the table. Well, I'm here to give you license. I give you license to do it proudly, to do it high, to do it in front of you, to do it at the table, to demonstrate to everyone in front of you that you feel confident about that which you're thinking or talking about. So we can use our hands to demonstrate how confident we feel. At the same time, we can use our hands, and sometimes our brain does it subconsciously to demonstrate just how insecure we are. And we do that in a variety of ways. While you're listening to this, rub your hands together very gently. And you'll find that most people will touch their hands during the day practically hundreds of times. And we do this to self-pacify. So somebody says, "Did you get that done?" We touch our hands together and we say, "Working on it." Now, it doesn't mean you're lying. It doesn't mean you're being deceptive. It means that in relation to the question, you're just pacifying a little bit as maybe you're being reminded of something. And it's okay for us to do this. And maybe we're asked a more difficult question. So we bring our hands together and we wring our hands together to the point where it discolors our fingers. So now we're sort of torturing our hands together and we say, "Geez, I don't know. I think I can get it done." And you see this struggle of the hands and they're sort of being wrung together. But there's one method of doing this that's universal that has almost been occluded from us because we tend to mix these things together, which is truly indicative of high distress. Not just distress, but high distress. And this is something we do when we intertwine our fingers, but we leave them straight. So we put one hand into the other so that our fingers cross, but they remain rigid and straight, and then we move the hand back and forth. And this is one of the best indicators of something that's extremely distressful or distasteful to us. So the next time you're talking to someone, watch the hands. And you'll see a combination of things. There may be some stroking. There may be playing with picking the skin on one of the fingers or the nail and so forth. All pacifiers. They may be rubbing their hands together. Again, pacifying. They may be steepling. They feel confident about what they're talking about. Or they may in fact be crossing their fingers together in this stroking manner, saying, "I'm deeply troubled by something." Now, that's not everything the hands tell us, because the hands, in fact, communicate so many things. Watch a child, and you say, "We're going to the playground." And you see them moving their hands back and forth, rubbing across each other, creating friction. They're so excited. And what they're doing is they're dealing with the excitement of the moment. Their hands are excited in the same way that the feet get excited. But there are ways that we can also show subtly when we're excited about something or not. And I want you to picture this or try this as you're listening to it. Interlace your fingers and let your thumbs rest in a downward position. And what you'll find is some people like to talk with their fingers interlaced. But what you'll find is that when they feel confident or happy about something, their thumbs will pop up. Just like that thermometer on a basting turkey, it just pops up. And when they're talking about something they dislike, the thumbs disappear. So you can have 10 minutes of an individual talking about their company, what they can do, the prospects of the future, and so forth. And then somebody says, well, what about the last quarter? And then you see the thumbs just collapse. And in one instance, such as that, you immediately pick up that they're disturbed by that question because it's no longer something happy to talk about. It's not something positive to talk about. Where have I used this? I've used this when I've talked to individuals about their involvement in a variety of events. And as I get them to talk, you see their thumbs pop up, they're talking with confidence, and then I say something like, well, thank you very much, but where were you last night? And all of a sudden those thumbs disappear. Doesn't mean they're going to lie to me. They may. Doesn't mean they're not telling me the truth. They may. But what it tells me is that in that instance, they didn't like the question that I asked them. So much so that their limbic brain said, away with the thumbs. So as you're beginning to see, the hands really do communicate quite a bit. They can illustrate, they can emphasize, they can reflect our confidence. But they can also reflect a lack of confidence. They can also reflect when we feel helpless. And we refer to this as the rogatory position of the hands. And it comes to us from the Latin, meaning to ask for or to pray for. And that's when someone comes to you with the palms up, or they make a statement which is palms up. Now, one thing is for someone to come to you and ask you for a favor, palms up, and say, hey, I'm moving this weekend. Would it be all right if I borrowed your truck? And as they talk to you, their palms are up. But it's quite another thing for someone to make a declarative statement to you with their palms up and say something like this. Yes, the project is finished, but the palms are up. This tends to weaken the message because our brain has indicated to us over and over for tens of thousands of years that anything that's palms up means that this is a sign of weakness, and that when it's palms down, it's a sign of strength. So the statement, yes, it's done with the palms up, is actually a weak statement. Now, what's interesting about this is, and it's a reflection of primate behavior, is often in the study of primates, primatologists will tell you that when primates first approach each other, they approach each other palm up so that the other primate can see that I'm pleading to be a part of you or to join you. But if suddenly one of the primates should turn his palm down, this is indicative of something that is more sinister. And we're not that far from that. We're not that far from that. In fact, when you see someone that's angry and upset and just really taking it out on somebody else, you don't see them doing this with their palms up. What you see them is palms down, punching the desk, slamming their palms or their hands on the desk, or leaning on a desk with their fingers very well spread apart, sitting very high as they're castigating someone. So just be aware that our hands are very subtle in what they can transmit. We can touch hard or soft, gently or smoothly, warmly or coldly. Couples talk about that when their lover touches them, the warmth is gone, that the hand feels cold. And that's a reflection of what's going on in the head. When we feel good about things, blood rushes to the surface of our skin. When we don't feel good about things, that blood is withdrawn and it's sent to the large muscles, particularly of the legs, so that if we have to leave, escape, or fight, we have this added blood available to us to help us in our survival. Because obviously we don't need it to communicate that we care. We need it to communicate that we need to get away. So we've talked a little bit about thumbs, and I want to talk about thumb displays. One of the things you'll notice, especially in Western society, is the way we use thumb displays. Sometimes a man with a jacket, he'll grab his lapels with his thumbs up, or he'll be wearing a lab coat or just a regular business coat, and he'll stick his fingers inside the coat, but he'll leave the thumbs out. These are called thumb displays. And thumb displays are high status displays. Rarely do we see these with blue-collar workers. We mostly see this with individuals who are white-collar, who have higher status, or who have narcissistic qualities. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. All I'm saying is this is usually where we see these features mostly. And it's usually indicative of someone who feels confident about themselves and what they're thinking and what they're feeling. So if this is what we see with the thumbs, well, what happens when the opposite emotions creep in? What happens when we don't feel comfortable, when we don't feel positive, when we are lacking confidence? Well, here's what's interesting. The thumbs disappear. Now, we talked earlier about interlaced fingers with thumbs up and thumbs down, but there's other ways that we do this. And I actually saw this not too long ago. I was teaching at a medical school. They had invited me to teach their senior students before they head out with their MD degrees on how to read nonverbal communications. And one of the doctors was approached by a senior doctor, and as he did so, I noticed that the junior doctor had his thumb sticking out of his pocket. This is the high status, high confidence display. But at a distance, I could see them, and I could see that they were having words. And as the senior doctor berated the junior doctor's thumbs disappeared. He literally took them and stuck the thumbs in the pockets of his pants, which is one of those low confidence displays that we often see, but we're not too sure about. So one of the ways that we show lack of confidence is we hide our thumbs, and we do it two ways: in our thumb pockets and inside our pants. And in fact, a few years ago, I was in Bogota, Colombia, at a famous hotel there. And I had stayed there so long, I'd become friends with the manager. And he was telling me about the new security staff they had hired because they have to check all passengers, all luggage, all vehicles coming in. And as I looked at these new employees, I said, there's something wrong here. And he said, yeah, there is, but I'm not sure what it is. And I said, well, step outside and I'll point it out to you. And these new security personnel, they had the right uniforms and they had weapons and everything. I said, but look how they look. And what it was is they were all standing around with their thumbs in their pockets. They looked like little boys waiting for their mother to finish their lunch bag to be sent off to school. And I said, that's what's wrong with the picture. This is a low confidence display being displayed by your security staff. That's not the kind of signal you want to send out. What you want is individuals who come across as very confident. And he says, well, how do I do that? And I say, the same way the Secret Service in the United States does. They protect the president, and they just do two things, and two things only, that makes them look like giants. And he said, well, what is it? I want to know so I can teach these guys. And I said, they never put their hands in their pockets. What you'll notice is their hands are always in front, usually in the steeple position, and their feet are never together. They're always a little bit spread apart. And he said, that's it? And I said, that's it. Something so simple as that can immediately transform you from someone who looks weak and insecure to someone who looks strong and confident.